Good morning and welcome to the live series Straight Off the Bat. Join us on Thursdays as we speak to individuals across multiple industries who will help you understand financial literacy and education. If you're joining us from Facebook, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you manage your money. Today, we're discussing how digital banking helps caregivers of seniors in Trinidad and Tobago with Nicole-Anna de Silva. Nicole-Anna is an attorney at law and an ACCA qualified accountant. She's actually one of our most attended live shows as well. Apparently, she's very popular, so I think you want to stick around for this. She's been practicing law for over a decade and is presently the chairperson of the legal committee of the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. She also advises RBC on legal issues throughout the Caribbean arising in the retail, business, corporate banking lines of business. She loves spending time with her family and traveling to different countries and learning new skills. So today we welcome Nicole-Anna. Thanks for joining us today.
I am here. So I really found this topic particularly interesting, following from our last topic in relation to elder abuse and powers of attorney. And to be honest, I was wondering, how can I really reach the audience in terms of the importance of digital banking in the context of a caregiver? So in this context, I would like to apply a very broad definition of a caregiver. Usually, we would associate a caregiver with someone who is employed to give care to an elderly person, but I don't think that definition serves us well in this context. I think in this context, we should consider caregivers as all persons who provide care to an elderly person. So it could be family members, it could be hired persons, it could be trained persons and untrained persons. And in that regard, it really is very impactful when you consider how digital banking can assist an elderly person as well as the caregiver for an elderly person. So I'm hopeful that we can adopt that very broad definition and take into account what exactly a caregiver's role may be in terms of an elderly person's financial affairs. So in that instance, and having that in mind, I would say that a caregiver may have a limited role in relation to an elderly person's financial affairs once they are duly appointed to act on that person's behalf, on the elderly person's behalf. So when I say duly appointed to act on the elderly person's behalf, it takes us back to our previous conversation, which focused on the use of powers of attorney to appoint one person to act on behalf of another person, and the power of attorney being a legal instrument outlining what are the actions and transactions that person can do on the person who gives the authority. So we'll call them the donor. The donee would be the person appointed or the representative. So what actions the representative can do on behalf of the person who would have provided them with the authority. So if a caregiver has a power of attorney, or a power of attorney was granted by the elderly person to a caregiver, the bank would take that into account in terms of transactions being undertaken on the elderly person's behalf. If there is no legal instrument, whether it is a court order, and we'll go into the court order aspect in a few minutes, or a power of attorney, which is what we are discussing now, if neither of these exist, which appoint the caregiver to act on behalf of the elderly person, the bank will be a little hesitant, actually I could say very hesitant, to allow a caregiver to conduct transactions or do any actions on behalf of the elderly person. And this is all within the context of ensuring that we act on behalf of our client and in our client's best interests. And I'm going to take us back to my first statement, where I would have indicated, I was trying to consider this topic, how to reach the audience, how to highlight the importance of there needs to be legal authority for a caregiver to act on behalf of an elderly person before they even transact on the elderly person's behalf. It is important that is properly documented. So one form of documenting this legal authority would be the power of attorney. Another form of documenting this authority would be via court order. And particularly this comes into our domain when the elderly person is mentally incapable. So when the bank receives any information that an elderly client may be mentally incapable, we will not act on behalf of that client unless we receive a court order appointing someone to act on behalf of that client. And we would only act on the instructions of the person appointed under the court order. And I think that is very important, that we all have to take into account when we consider caregivers and their role in terms of assisting elderly persons in conducting financial transactions, in doing certain actions involving the bank, and in having regard to the fact that the bank has the elderly client as a client, and a caregiver who may be hired to take care of the elderly person would have the elderly person as a client, and they also have the elderly person's interest at hand. But from the bank's perspective, we are interested in getting instructions from our client or a person legally appointed to act on our client's behalf. So I think it's quintessential we start there, particularly in the context of this discussion, how digital banking can help caregivers. So in the context of digital banking, of course, we want to reinforce that caregivers are not permitted to act on behalf of the client through digital means if they are not legally entitled to do so. So that is something that I think that we should all take away from this discussion, the importance of being legally appointed to act on behalf of the elderly person. And we taking into account, caregiver is a very broad definition that we're adopting. We're not adopting the focused definition of persons employed to give care to an elderly person, but we're giving a broad definition. Just persons who provide care, whether it is a family member, a neighbor, a licensed nurse. It's all of these persons, a licensed medical professional, all of these persons fall within our definition of caregiver, at least in the context of this discussion.
And welcome back to Straight Off the Lip Bat, a live series that covers financial literacy and education. If you're joining us from YouTube, thank you so much. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you manage your money. Today, we're discussing how digital banking helps caregivers for seniors in Trinidad and Tobago with Nicole-Anna de Silva. So we're going to bring her back in because this is such a robust conversation that requires a lot of information. And when it comes to the legal system, a lot of us don't understand. Some of us even read the laws and still don't understand. So we're going to try and, pull as much information from Nicole Hannah, as possible. So we were discussing caregivers, power of attorney, but when it comes to caregivers, it's such a broad term, in terms of it could be someone looking after someone at their home, it could be a licensed medical profession, folks within a retirement home. But within that caregiver's responsibility, there comes some financial elements. What are some of the expectations when it comes to managing finances from a caregiver perspective?
That's an excellent question, Pauline. And I'm taking that question in the context of how digital banking can assist in terms of the financial responsibilities placed on both elderly persons as well as caregivers. So if we take into account caregivers who are employed in the homes of elderly persons and who the elderly person may him or herself be making payments to the caregivers. Now we have found, previously a lot of these payments may have been done via cash. So you would have paid, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, give that payment via cash or go into the bank and create a standing order into the caregiver's account, maybe another option that may be employed. However, in the context of digital banking, I think that it's an opportune time, particularly as we have the relaxation of some of the COVID-19 restrictions, as we see more movement happening throughout Trinidad and Tobago. I think it is an opportune time for elderly persons as well as caregivers to consider the use of digital banking for payments for services. So I will take it from a personal perspective. When I had to utilize the services of a caregiver for my family's needs, what my experience is that all payments were made via digital banking. And what was the benefit of that, particularly in terms of record keeping, is that I am able to identify when certain payments were made for the fees, for the caregivers that I would have utilized. And it helps, particularly in the instance, which is not my instance, but in other instances where you are using a caregiver for an elderly person, where there may be a contention in terms of whether fees were paid or not, whether there was an issue where the cash may have been withdrawn from a bank account but not received by the caregiver, where there's security issues from the caregiver's perspective, walking around with a lot of cash and not being able to make it directly to the bank, whether it is using the ATM to deposit the cash or going over the counter to be able to deposit the cash into a bank account. This session really aims to highlight the ease in which these payments could be made, whether it's from the elderly person's point of view, persons in charge of the elderly person's financial affairs, paying caregivers who are employed to assist the elderly person. I think because we have these facilities now from all the different member banks of BAT, we want to take the opportunity to encourage persons who are using caregivers to provide services of care to use digital banking as opposed to using cash, where you don't have the form of record, you don't have the same level of security in terms of persons not having to walk around with cash in hand. It is an excellent alternative in this day and age to make these payments. So that is the focus that I would want us to kind of zero in on in terms of highlighting how caregivers, as well as how elderly persons can take advantage of the digital channels in order to access care and to pay for care.
So I actually have an example that I think your advice would be required on this one, because I know someone who was taking care of someone who has Alzheimer's, which is a very difficult disease, and the children of this person lives abroad. So they were completely managing the individual, their mother, and had to go actually pay for certain things. So what I found usually happens is there's this verbal trust that happens between the caregivers and the power of attorney. But what advice would you have for those caregivers who, just want to get the job done, but doesn't necessarily have that level of, I guess, backing, or to say, okay, this is what I've signed up for and I'm going to get my money back?
In that instance, well, you've raised an important point, particularly in relation to Alzheimer's, because it returns us to the question as to whether the elderly person is mentally capable to handle their financial affairs. And if there are any questions in relation to that, certainly in that instance, there would be a request, particularly from a banking perspective, to receive evidence confirming that the person is able to handle their financial affairs. And usually that evidence may take the form of a medical certificate from a doctor confirming that the person is medically capable of handling their financial affairs. And this is the first step that will be undertaken before any access is given to the elderly person's finances. So I'm just putting that out there in the context of your example. In the event that we're speaking about the elderly person's bank account, or accessing the elderly person's bank account in terms of paying for certain things, if we put that aside, or if we take the view that the person is mentally capable of handling their financial affairs and we receive evidence to support this, the next question would be, when the children are abroad, whether it is the children's funds that are being used to pay for certain things, or whether it is the elderly person's funds being used to pay for these things. So that question has to be answered in the context of providing advice. But I am going to make certain assumptions. So my assumption would be that it is the children's funds being used to pay for the elderly person's care, or the certain services that need to be provided, that the caregiver is now being asked to, assist in terms of making the payments. And in that instance, if a caregiver is being asked to assist to do things along those lines, it also brings to light the ease with which digital banking can be used. Because if we have children who are abroad with access to funds, access to a bank account, and access to digital banking, who can use digital banking to send funds to the caregiver to do certain transactions on behalf of their parent, it makes life so much easier. You have the transaction record from the children's perspective that they would have sent funds to the caregiver. The caregiver also has the record once they have the digital banking application, or even they have the transaction record on their account, that these funds were placed in their account in order to be able to do certain transactions on behalf of the elderly person. There's no need in that instance to access the funds of the elderly person. It eliminates the inconvenience, which is, I think, what you were trying to highlight, the inconvenience of the caregiver utilizing their personal funds to do certain transactions on behalf of the elderly person. And to me, in that instance, there's a win-win, which, we may not have had readily accessed prior to COVID. I think during the COVID period, we saw a lot of more people coming into the fold of digital banking and access to funds, access to information on accounts digitally. And we want to continue that momentum, even though we have an ease of the restrictions related to COVID. We want to continue that momentum. So that is a win-win situation between the children who are abroad and the caregiver who is in Trinidad. There's also the option for the caregiver to also issue receipts. So when the children abroad would ask for certain transactions to be assistance, essentially, from caregivers to conduct certain transactions, I think it is important for both sides for records to be maintained. From the caregiver's perspective, writing down which date this transaction was requested, when the funds were received from the children abroad, as well as retaining and keeping the receipts for any items purchased on behalf of the elderly person. And we have access, a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us have access to camera phones as well as WhatsApp. So taking a picture of the receipt, sending that information back to the children abroad, it is important to have that type of record keeping generally. This is apart from digital banking. This is apart from the core conversation, but certainly it's important to have that type of record keeping generally. So in instances where there may be discrepancies, there may be disputes, there may be just a need to clarify certain things, at least there's a record of the transactions that would have been requested and when they would have been completed, as well as the receipts to verify that the transactions would have happened. So that would be my general advice, again, based on the assumption that we're not utilizing the elderly person's funds. We are utilizing the funds of the children abroad, and the caregiver in Trinidad is able to, facilitate the requests of the children abroad.
Welcome back to Straight Off the Bat. If you're joining us from Facebook, thank you. Don't forget to like and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you manage your money. Today, we're discussing how digital banking helps caregivers, Trinidad and Tobago, specifically seniors, with Nicole-Anna de Silva. So we're going to close off this discussion because, it's inevitable. So if that's the case, how are we putting things in place to make sure folks aren't scrambling when you're not around? So when it comes to a senior ward, Nicole-Anna, could you explain what that terminology means and then what happens after with regards to finances?
Well, in the context of a senior ward, it would be an elderly person who is in the care of another person. And in the context of mortality, when that elderly person dies, if there was a power of attorney that would have been granted by that senior person who has now passed away, that power of attorney would no longer be valid once that person dies. Any authority that would have been passed by that person to any other person during their lifetime would no longer be valid. And what we would be looking for from a banking perspective, from a legal perspective, is that if the person had a will, that the executor or executrix appointed via the will would be would apply to the courts for a grant of probate. A final topic for us to end with. But it is an important topic because we even, at from an early stage in terms of our career, in terms of building a family, building a life, building a legacy, it is important for us to also have wills, also make the proper preparations for when we pass on. And you find that the younger generation would not take into account making a will. The older generation may not take into account making a will, but the fact that a will does not exist really brings into play a lot of different dynamics when a person dies, whether the person is elderly or not. So if we want to take something else from this conversation, is the importance of creating a will at any stage and revisiting the will as life happens. Because you have the acquisition of a house, you buy a car, you sell a house, you sell a car, and you need to make sure that your will changes as your life changes and as your assets change. And Pauline, I know that you are an avid marathoner and you are doing the most, as the young people say. And even in that context of being healthy and vibrant and carpe diem being your main motto, it is important for us all to take mortality into account and to make the necessary preparations, because it really brings to light when you pass on how many different dynamics happen in terms of what is the legacy that you would have left and how people treat with the legacy that you have left. So it is a dreary topic to end on, but it is an important topic to end on. I'm seeing you now, Pauline. I hope I'm not making you blush.
No, it's okay. I think these straight off the bat live shows have taught me so much. The fact that I get to learn these things and engage with you guys it's been really life changing. And I think that is such an important way for us to end this discussion, because we think and I say we because back in my 20s I'm like, I'm gonna live forever. But you're right, you just never know. And I think that we all have to put those things in place. So just give us a quick tip as to anybody who wants to approach this, mortality conversation with their parents. What's the number one thing, opening conversation they should start off with?
The opening conversation that you should start off with is, I want your legacy to be your own, and I would like you to make sure that that happens. And in order to do so, it is important to have a will. Truly, I think that is the most important opening. Having your legacy be your own. If you don't have a will, you're opening up your legacy to the determination of whether it is the legal structure within the legislation or others in terms of how they determine things are to be partitioned. And that's not what you want for your parents. So having that first step, having them create that legacy in writing, following the proper legal requirements, I think it's extremely important to have that type of conversation and open in that way.
Well, thank you so much for that piece of advice. I think that's a great way for us to end. Thanks again to Nicole-Anna de Silva for joining us today and sharing insight into how digital banking helps caregivers in Trinidad and Tobago, specifically seniors. Don't forget to sign up and be notified for the next live show in the comment section, wherever you're looking at this, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And always be sure to follow, because you don't want to miss a single live show. Thanks again for joining us. We're actually going to end off today's session with a very, this is such a cool idea and a great series. It's called Ask a Banker. And if you want to learn more about this series, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because you're going to get to know a lot about your banker. So I'll see you on the next live show. Bye.
And everywhere, I remember my first girlfriend I was wearing that shirt. That was the style. I was slamming. When wear it now, that's when you used to wear big clothes and baggy jeans.
Right.
And I still have that shirt up to today. Hi, my name is Mark, and I am a banker. And this is Ask a Banker Anything with BAT. Doubles or roti, you could only choose one. Doubles all the way. Doubles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Working in the bank and being privy to the different levels of technology that we have and payment systems, I hardly have cash. I literally never have cash. And the day that a doubles man can have access to digital payments, I will never have cash. I use whether it be cards, debit cards, online payments, online transfers on a regular basis. I cannot remember the last time I stepped into a utility company to pay a bill. Definitely I do everything in either online or digital space. How did you get into banking? Truth be told, purely by accident. I always say I had applied to several different institutions. When I left school, it just so happened that First Citizens, reached out, and, I thought I was just going in to do a job, and little did I know that, it would really jumpstart my entire career. If you weren't a banker, what do you think you would be? I know that offhand. If ever I decide to leave banking, I would definitely love to open up my own restaurant and be a chef that specializes in gourmet Creole cuisine. What's the first thing you would do if you checked your bank account and it had $1 billion in it? I would immediately call the branch and find out why that money is there. I am a God-fearing man, and they know that $1 billion would definitely not be mine. First thing I ever purchased when I got my first paycheck was a blue plaid shirt in Detour stores. I remember watching the shirt for an entire month, and I told myself when I got paid, that is the first thing I'm going to buy. And so done. Why is having a bank account important? For many reasons. For you to really be part of this payment ecosystem, it all starts with for you to apply for a loan to fuel, whether it be a mortgage or a car or you want to take a loan to do some studies or personal. It starts with a bank account. A bank account is really the first step in cementing that relationship between you and the financial institution. So it really is the foundation for any future transactions or interactions with a bank. Which bank is the easiest to open an account in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, I can say that in First Citizens, you can schedule an appointment online at a branch of your choosing. And although yes, there are a lot of different documentation that we are mandated by to have prepared, we really pride ourselves in being the easiest in terms of account opening. Which is the best bank in Trinidad and Tobago, and why? Well, your answer is in the question. We are the only indigenous bank within Trinidad and Tobago. And First Citizens prides itself on being first in customer service, in our commitment to technology and driving a lot of the technology that will make your day-to-day simpler, easier. It really comes down to our tagline. We really focus on being simple, on being easy, and being fast. And that is First Citizens.